All About Writing with Ben and Sara.
Welcome to All About Writing, the podcast that covers everything about the world of writing from the inside out. This is episode 40, part 7 on our... I don't even know what part I'm on. Sorry, I gotta stop everything.
Okay.
I don't even
We
know where I
edited.
am.
Episodes 40, part 7 on our series and getting started. And I'm Ben.
Getting started. Okay, I promise I'm ready this time. I know I'm the one who said let's get going, and I'm just like a
Okay.
total bag of hammers here.
All right.
Okay, I'm ready for real this time. You ready?
All right. Ready when you are.
Okay. Welcome to All About Writing, the podcast that covers everything about the world of writing from the inside out. This is episode 40, part 7 on our series on getting started. I'm Ben, here with my co-host Sara, who is an award-winning, best-selling author, screenwriter, editor, and TED Talk presenter.
And I'm Sara, here with my co-host Ben, who is an award-winning, best-selling author and ghostwriter, editor, and publisher. And episode 40 today is going to tackle something that a lot of first-time writers or even intermediate writers struggle with, and at least in our experience, both personal and professionally, and that is don't expect perfection the first time. And I want to kind of just grow on that because I think sometimes we've already talked about how like the first draft is crap. But this is bigger than just the first draft. I think this means don't expect perfection the first time you write a chapter or you even, make a book. I mean, I actually was just talking to someone the other day who they've written the book, but it is ponderous and it is the first draft, but it's also like sometimes stories you think are awesome may sit on your desktop for years after you've moved on to other books because the first one isn't, you expect it to be perfect and it's only later that you can go back and make it, quote, perfect. But I want to know what you think of when you hear that phrase, like don't expect perfection the first time. It's more than just the first draft is crap, right?
Yeah, it is. Because, like you said, even the whole book, like when people sit down to write their first book, it's often a lot of passion. Like they've been wanting to write this, they just feel motivated, and that's awesome. All that creativity is flowing out of them. But very often, someone who's writing their first book, they're not that experienced a writer. And so their dialogue could be clunky, their structure could be weak. They're just kind of all over the place. Who knows? Whatever it is, writing is an art and you have to practice it. Very few people can just pick up a violin and start playing Mozart on it, right? Like you've got to practice. And I think that we forget that writing is the same because we're all basically literate and that we know how to write. We know how to make sentences, with words. But there's very different from actually just putting words down on a page and telling a good story. And I think what I find is that people will often approach their first project with a lot of passion, which is great, but they haven't yet honed their skills. So when they get to the end, they're happy and they're satisfied and like, yay, I finished it, I feel good about myself. And so you should. But then when you actually look at the book or maybe get some professional feedback, you might get a lot of critiques saying, well, you need to work on this and this and this and this and this because your craft isn't there. And that can be really demoralizing because people think that, well, I've read tons of books. I know how to write books. Books are easy. And then they actually do it. It's actually a lot harder than you think.
Well, and I think to your point too, where you're going to get critiques and everything. Usually, that first book or book, and I mean book because it could be your 8th draft of the same book, and you still feel like it's not perfect. And you're struggling because you're like, well, I've rewritten it and I've made multiple drafts and I've taken, into account feedback I'm getting from people and it's still not perfect and it's still maybe getting rejected from agents or publishers if you're going out with it. And you're like, I don't understand. And I think some of that is, to your point, yes, craft needs to be practiced, but also usually early on, you don't have your voice. as a writer. Like that isn't developed either. And that's what can come across as mismatching on the page. So even though it may be the plot is perfect or your characters are perfectly developed, but as a whole, it's just you're expecting perfection from these separate parts that don't feel this like they fit together yet because your voice as a writer is not the string through all of those things tying them together either.
Yeah. Yeah, and there can be lots of different components of writing a book that just aren't quite right. Like you might nail parts of it, but other parts you're still working on, you're still developing. And I mean, I know a lot of people don't really outline when they first start writing a book. You know, they sort of have this idea and they're just going to kind of go with it and just see where it goes. And you can have a lot of fun, being creative and exploring, but the story that you wind up with at the end, I mean, the plot might frankly be a hot mess. And if you're lacking the experience to know how to fix it, you might just think, "But I love that scene. I love how that happened. Why would I fix it?" And then you'll get feedback, and you'll be like, "No, it's just not working." And I guess what I want to say here is that I don't want anyone to feel bad if they come across that. Either they feel that it's not up to snuff, or they get feedback and someone says it's not quite there yet. Because I think it's an unrealistic expectation to think that your first book is going to be the height of your literary career. It's just the start, and I think all of us we're probably going to have one or two, you know, trial runs on writing books, before we really, like you said, Sarah, like before you find your voice, before you've got that confidence, before you've learned how to tie things together. There's lots of ways to get tripped up.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and another one too, that you and I talk about because, early on I was not an outliner. And now having worked with you, in the past and through so many books, you know, you are like, you're like, send an outline, do outlines. And I do them now, and I have to for series purposes and things like that. But my gut is still, very vague outlines at the most.
Hmm.
But pacing, that is something that I think people also, uh, that's hard to perfect.
Yep.
And even for seasoned writers, there's still structural pacing issues that are maybe some of the biggest hangups that you might have. And that does take practice as well. I know some of my earliest books, stuff I've written that sit collecting dust on my hard drive. Let's be real. No one has seen. And the pacing is horrible,
Hmm.
which
Hmm.
I can see now. But early on, you're like, "Oh, it's a good story. It just moves." No, it
Yeah.
was bad. It was bad. There's a reason I'm never pulling those out of the dusty archives of my hard drive. But um I think you're spot on too, Ben. Like I think we need to give ourselves grace as writers, whether it's your first time or your third book or your 18th attempt to try and get your book out there, expecting, oh, it's going to be perfect this time, or,
Hmm.
whatever, is just not a fair thing for ourselves, particularly because this is such a subjective career, right?
Hmm.
Like
Hmm.
and so to expect perfection where it's just truly opinion every which way you turn is also
Hmm.
setting yourself up to want to just stop because you're not finding that, oh, it's perfect, it's a Pulitzer, all of that. you know Very few of us will have that kind of perfection, and even people who win those awards like are usually, they might have won the award but they're not selling their books by the millions. So was it a
Yeah.
perfect book?
And certainly I have read award-winning books that I think this is crap, because it's subjective, right? It
Right.
obviously spoke to the judges, but it didn't speak to me for whatever reason, you know.
Right.
And when I say it's crap, meaning I don't enjoy this. I'm sure it's brilliantly crafted,
Yes.
but for whatever reason didn't speak to me. So you're absolutely right. The subjectivity of this is huge. And I think that for any author to expect perfection ever, actually, you're going to fall short because nobody is going to, like, or you're never going to have a book that everybody loves. You know, if you've published a book and you've got some 4 star, some 5 star reviews, got some 3 stars, and then there's a 1 star in there. Don't feel bad about that. If anything, that validated you as an author. Okay, good. I made somebody angry. Good. You know, it's gonna happen. It's gonna happen to everybody. That there's gonna be some books that you just think,
Have you gone on Goodreads ever and looked at some of the ratings of famous books? I went on and I looked at the Bible as a book. It has like terrible ratings. I'm like, it's the Bible. Who gets to rate this with
yeah,
2 stars? But to your point, like every book is subjective to everybody. So, you know, and so I think that that's something that as writers we always talk about getting every sentence right or
mhm,
getting the plot perfect or getting a book that is validating on whatever level we need, but we don't talk about how it's not okay or how it's okay to not be perfect. And
mhm.
I think the more we talk about how it is a struggle to like just feel good enough as is, then that'll maybe give us freedom more as writers to mess up or try new things because we know it doesn't have to be perfect.
Yeah, and this brings up another thought that I have about looking for perfection, because I've come across this often with other authors that I'm talking to as an editor or even as a publisher, and sometimes people are afraid to give their book over for editing, right? Because, oh, I just want to do one more pass. I just want to check it over one more time.
Hmm.
And I have friends who have sat on books for like 5, 6 years. They finished the book, but they just won't stop noodling with it. And I have one good friend who he admits now that the version of his book about 4 versions ago was the peak copy of that book, but he just wouldn't. He was just so nervous that he would get like bad feedback if he gave it to somebody. He just kept fiddling with it and fiddling with it and fiddling with it, and he actually made it worse. And that can happen. So I do encourage everyone out there, if you've never published before, if you've just got your first book that you want to show to somebody, just take the plunge. Just do it. If you can get an editor or even just a trusted friend or a professional who you know is going to give you good advice, please hand it over to them. They will see things that you as the author can't see, and it'll probably help. And don't feel bad if you get criticism, because that's how we all get better. And every author has an editor. Every author has an editor. None of us are perfect. We need that second set of eyes to show us, ooh, this didn't quite work. You know, um, so don't feel bad if you hand over your book and you get criticism for it, because you can go and make it better. And don't try and make your book so perfect that an editor will just look at it and just hand it back to you stunned. Not a mark. Not a mark. This is bliss to read, right? Not going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's the moral of this story today, right? It's just give yourself permission to not be perfect, period.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Do your best, have fun, and genuinely do your best. Do it as best as you think you can, but recognize it's not perfect. It's never going to be perfect. It's just going to be as good as you can make it. And then with an editor, with some help, it'll probably get even better, and you'll make it better because now you've had some help. And even then, it still won't be perfect, but it'll probably be pretty good. And that's really all we can aim for.
Yep. That's it.
All right. Awesome. Well,
Pep talk day.
yeah, that's our show for today, everyone. So please don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any of our chats, and feel free to leave a review because it really does help us a lot. If anyone is looking for help with any aspect of their writing, we recommend our friends at Cascadia Author Services. You can find them at cascadiaauthorservices.com. You can catch up with Sarah at sarahdalman.com and on Instagram.
And you can find Ben at bennettrcoles.com as well as on Facebook and Instagram. Thanks again for joining us today. Please reach out if there are any topics you'd like us to cover in future episodes. Otherwise, we will see you again when we next chat all about writing.
This has been All About Writing with Ben and Sara.